traveled about 1,600 feet into the mountain. Little over a quarter mile, or roughly 488 meters. But we have not actually gone down. As a matter of fact, we're about 8 feet higher than we were in the platform back outside. And that elevation actually does serve two purposes. The first lead-to-know point I like to emphasize on my tours is that if you see or hear anything in the environment around us or in my presentation that seems like it would have been a way for the company to cut its costs, it probably was. Three things mattered the most here in the industry during the era: the expediency, efficiency, and productivity of production. Essentially, the money mattered the most, even more so than the lives of the individual miners. To that extent, the first area of cutting costs would have been in regards to all this groundwater around us. This is natural groundwater that flows up out of the earth, and it will flow every moment of every day. In any underground mine, there's a constant struggle between keeping this water out and personnel in. To that extent here, it was easier, cheaper, and more efficient to simply have this water pumped up to this level and then have it be allowed to flow naturally on its own out of the mine going down this slow gradient than it would have been for them to pump it all the way directly out of the mine through, say, the portal. That's what that little channel or canal you may have noticed next to the rails was for. The other purpose would have been for that of the coal extraction itself. It was easier and more efficient for mule power and then mechanized power to take equipment out of the mine going down this slow gradient than it would have been for them to take it out on even or level terrain. The same applies for bringing empty equipment back into the mine. Now that equipment more specifically refers to loaded cars of coal, which would have been staged here to be taken out of the mine. An area we know as the passing branch or the siding. This is where those cars would have been mustered, often in huge chains of upwards of 30 at a time, being brought here from the shaft area using a device that we know as the Go Devil, which we'll be able to see just up ahead. But before we do so, I ask that you please keep in mind that smaller set of rails you can see in the proper gauges ahead of us. They'll be important to the telling of the Go Devil. But if you'll follow me, we can actually go see it.
Yep.
Now here we arrive at the Go Devil. The Go Devil was in fact this little four-wheeled cart right here. What this cart would do is ride upon the smaller set of rails I pointed out, and in doing so, fit underneath the cars of coal, physically grab them, and then move them all throughout the line that it had access to. Now this one you can see here really could only
There goes the light.
we just left. To that extent, it would not have been the only one. As a matter of fact, there's another Go Devil that's on the other side of the shaft. The point to emphasize here, however, is not necessarily the equipment itself, but rather what powered it. Steam. Steam drove almost every piece of machinery you would have found down in this mine prior to that 1931 date. Afterwards, we're beginning to see systems like the Go Devil beginning to transition over to the broadening electrical power. However, steam would have still remained a critical component in the function and operation of our mine, as there were more so important with steam than empowering the beating heart of our mine, the mine shaft, just up ahead of us. Now, if you have some personal lights, feel free to turn them on. But we're going to start
Oh, you want light?
here.
We can give you light. Boom. Need light?
There you go.
We got light.
You got a good one.
Perfect. Come here, you want that?
Just don't look at it. Yep.
You're the one that's
Yep. You good?
Now, here we arrive at the pride of our mine and the pride of our tour. As before you lies the only remaining intact and tourable deep anthracite mine shaft left in our region. We classify this as a two-compartment shaft, based on the simple principle that it has two independently operable elevators. Now, a note of these elevators is that the miners would have not actually controlled them from here. Instead, they would have utilized a system of simple steam whistles and signals. The actual signal can be seen back out in the museum to notify a group of individuals back out on the surface what these lifts needed to do. Now, to get there, notice the steel cables that run up off of the elevators. Those cables ascend. There we go. Those cables ascend 190 feet back from us to the surface, where they arrive at a structure we know as the head frame, an image of which can be seen in the placard on my left. Now at the head frame, the cables would have gone over massive steel wheels, where they would have then descended their way back down the surface of the mountain, and arrived at a place we know as the hoisting house, or the hoisting engine. There, the individuals I mentioned previous, the hoisting engineer or the hoisting operators, would have used their control systems to maneuver these elevators all throughout the additional levels of our mine. Here in the number 9, we descend for 4 levels in total. Right now we are on 1. Level 2 is about 200 feet below us. Level 3, 200 feet below 2, 4, 200 feet below 3. You love that number here. Now, note in these elevators, you may have realized, is the lack of any kind of real safety. Those handles you see hanging from the roofs there were the only things the miners had to hold on to keep them inside these elevators during their operation, as there were no railings and there were no doors. Those would have only slowed down the cars of coal coming through the elevator. So aside from that, the only thing actually keeping the miners safe would have been those roofs, which we, which we would have called bonds. Those are there solely to protect the equipment and by extent the miners from anything that could have succumbed to the forces of gravity. Debris making its way down the shaft. Perhaps someone up here accidentally drops a tool. Aside from the elevators, the other point of interest in our tour, in this chamber, is the concrete structure you may have noticed on your right. We have many buildings like this all throughout our mine, another one's just up the passage behind me. Another one more so important we'll see later on. But this one in particular actually served 2 purposes. The first was that of a repair shop. It was easier, cheaper, and more efficient to repair broken or malfunctioning equipment underground than it would have been for them to cart it all the way back out to the surface. Think of it this way. Why load up a car full of faulty drills when that car can instead be rolling out of here with 5 tons of anthracite? Aside from that, the other purpose that this building would have served is that as the office of this level's foreman. Now each level had their own foreman, but they all had the same responsibility. And that would have been to come in at the beginning of the shift and simply take a tour of their respective level of the mine, ensuring its structural safety and stability, while also guaranteeing the miners against any hazardous quantities of water or gas, while also ensuring that all the company-provided equipment and utilities were functioning up to their operational standards. Then they would leave, only to return at the end of the shift. They would have simply taken a head count and ensured that every man that had come down here was accounted for, and that no accidents or incidents occurred in the shift. Looking to the door frame, you may have noticed the thermometer. That needle does not move, and it will remain 50 degrees Fahrenheit down here regardless of what time of year it is or what the weather and the temperature are like back outside. Now that does lend itself to some interesting effects, the foremost of which is going back to the groundwater. It will never freeze, and as I mentioned, it will flow every moment of every day. Here, during the operation of the mine, the water would have been pumped out of the lower levels endlessly, even if no one had been in the mine at that moment. Today, we no longer need to do that, as our operation only takes place this roughly 600 or so feet of walking in the passage back to the portal. Thus, what has been allowed to happen is the water has returned to its natural resting point in the water table, about 30 or so feet below our second level. So levels 3 and 4 are completely underwater and totally inaccessible. Just up ahead is an opportunity to see exactly that. We have provided a graded overlook that will allow you to lean over and look straight down this mine shaft, the water resting 200 plus feet below us. It is a steel grate and it will hold you. However, I can't see the same for any loose items you may have. Cameras, cell phones, headphones, loose glasses, whatever have you. If it fits through those bars and ends up doing so, it's not coming back up. Because believe me, the trip down to that second level is not worth a cell phone. Not that that's the reason I made the trip, but just trust me. So if you'll follow me.
Yeah, me too. I thought I had to work hard to work when I worked. Not for me.
Well, we're going to work that out. This has to stop.
But I guess you had to eat, you did what you had to do.
We're not going to. Here comes.
Assuming, yeah, the way you talk.
It's really they hold on to those. It's the only thing that can go on that wall.
Oh, that's what it looks like on. You're fine. Lower. Oh, look down.
Oh, you can see down, yeah.
Right here, you can see that.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, you can.
Your light should show it.
Yeah, here we go.
I'm scared of heights. You just check those fingers there, Pat.
Yep.
Was that scary?
You can see a component critical to its function, and one more so critical to the function of every mine that operated in our region. As resting upon this mechanism we call the transfer table is one of 8 original coal cars we have uncovered here in our mine. Empty, this car weighs around 1 ton. It had around a 5-ton capacity for anything they could fill it with, from sandstone, slate, shale, equipment, anthracite coal foremost, and even men. This is one of the ways they would have brought the miners into the mine. Back then, there only would have been a simple cutout on the side of the wall to serve as their door to cut in, at which point they only had rudimentary wooden benches. For a better example, I would turn you towards the car that rests in front of the powder house back outside. Well, actually now, as of last week, this is one of 9 coal cars we have recovered here in our mine. What this car is sitting on top of, we call the transfer table. With this mechanism, a single individual stationed at these levers here would have been able to maneuver this car and go either on or through the left or right elevators when they got here. Keep in mind that point of expediency. When these elevators were running, they would have never stopped moving. Just long enough for equipment to have gotten on, off, or through, and only one of them would have ever been at this level at any given moment. It was his responsibility to make sure this car was staged and ready to go for when the time came. With the other lever, he's able to operate the other Go Devil I mentioned, tucked into the corner of the fencing here. Now the miners would have done many different things with these cars, foremost obviously which would have been to fill them. To do so, they had a variety of different tools, techniques, and devices to do exactly that, some of which can actually be seen on the wall just over here. While he does that, he's going to slowly rotate this bar in his hands, while his labor working behind him is going to strike this end here, this roughly half-inch target, with a sledgehammer. Hard hats, nor reliable forms of lighting had yet to be invented nor standardized. By the time they were, the mines were already well into the introduction of power tools and equipment, such as these 2 drills here, which would have been powered by some form of compressed air, steam, or gas fed into the line you can see in the ceiling above you. Now, using all these tools here, the miners were mining exclusively anthracite coal. Anthracite coal, much like almost every other form of coal, does not form in clumps or deposits as some media may have you believe. Instead, it forms in what we know as veins, long stretches of material that form and shape as the mountains here grew and evolved. Here in northeastern Pennsylvania, the veins of anthracite often are so massive, they intersect many different communities, entire cities, even whole counties, to such a degree that many of them have earned their own unique names in order to be distinguished apart from each other. Here in the number 9, for example, we intersect 4 such veins. At the platform we exited the train, the Orchard vein. At the first Go Devil, that tunnel behind us, the Primrose vein. Just up ahead, the Diamond vein, and even further than that, the Mammoth, one of the largest veins of coal on Earth. Now, as we start to make our way up there, I do ask you to please keep in mind those Go Devil pulleys have been on the floor, to the left side of the tunnel. We don't want to see anyone trip and get hurt. The foreman really doesn't have the time for that paperwork. That's a joke, by the way. Don't tell myself. Don't follow me. Now, that tunnel to your left and the tunnel to your right, and the stretch in between is a section of the diamond vein of coal. This was once entirely solid anthracite. And And it's a good example of the extensive nature of the coal fields that I was alluding to. As this one vein in particular goes over 60 miles long. Now devoid of such coal, it becomes a passageway, one that serves a number of different purposes, that of distinct practicality, but the foremost of which was in that of its namesake, the mule lane. This is how they would have moved the mules between the first and second levels of our mine, and then the second and the third. Now this passageway here is formerly a set of stairs that were carved out of the rock. The problem for the people leading the mules down this passageway is that that staircase goes on for about 200 or so feet at a 40-degree angle downwards. It reaches a platform, turns around, and does the same until it reaches the second level of our mine. It gets worse when you consider that each of those steps, when they were intact, were about this tall, to my knees. I don't recommend the climb out of personal experience, as that is 30 stories down and up. And it gets even worse when you consider that the people most often leading the mules down this passageway looked not much older than him. You need to understand the grim reality of this industry. Is in that we predict many of the safety organizations and laws that oversee the work. When we have a young boy around the age of 6 or 7, he would have not been in school. He would have instead been working here in the anthracite industry. He would not have been underground per se. Instead, he would have been located back out on the surface, working in a structure we know as the coal breaker or the coal colliery. What this was a massive structure where the coal was taken to be broken down and processed once it leaves the mountain. Now, unfortunately, none still stand today. But what he's doing in the breaker is working as what we know a breaker boy. It would have been his job, alongside about a dozen or so other boys his age, to sit inside of the breaker, on top of chutes, not dissimilar in size from the Go Devil tracks in the middle of the room. It was their job to sit on top of those chutes and reach into a flow of rock and coal. Imagine all this was moving. Reaching into that flow and picking out anything from it that was not anthracite with their bare hands. Rock from the wall, debris from the timbers, God forbid a piece of the breaker boy sitting in front of them. And I mean that. It would have not been uncommon to see a breaker boy missing a part of a finger, or in the worst cases, most of their hands. And it gets even worse when you consider that the breaker boys account for the youngest deaths to occur in this industry as well. As they got older, they could work a number of different jobs in the mines, amongst that of which may have been a mule driver. Around the age of about 14 to 16, it now would have been his responsibility to lead these animals and the coal cars they carried all throughout the mine that they can get to. Basically, your mule driver was nothing more than a go devil. In fact, in the grand scale of the operation, usually the mule held far more value than the boy that led it. The point to emphasize here now is not necessarily the boy himself, but rather his head. As resting atop his head is a simple, soft canvas cap. This was not designed to protect him in any way, but rather solely to hold this little headlamp on the front of him. What this was an oil and wick headlamp, basically a glorified lantern. Now produces a roughly 2 to 3 inch tall yellow flame that would have been his only source of light for his working day prior to the invention and standardization of carbide chemical lamps and electrical headlamps. I just got that in your eyes, I'm so sorry. Now the point to take away from here now in regards to the flame is the other danger I mentioned with the foremen, is that they would have come in at the beginning of the shift looking for water but also for gas. Mine gases here come in 2 primary forms. Each is largely a blanket term, referring to a wide variety of different gases that fall into one of 2 categories. The first of which we call black damp. What black damp is any gas that causes a decrease in breathable oxygen that is not combustible. Carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen. Typically it is odorless and colorless, but it is more dense than air. It hangs near the floor, and if enough accumulates, a miner will asphyxiate. The other kind we deal with is called fire damp. And as you can imagine, that's any gas now that does largely the same, except now it is combustible. The big one we deal with here is methane. Methane is also odorless and colorless, but it is lighter than air. It hangs in its ceiling, near his open flame headlamp, at which point it is important to remember that the smallest spark or flame, such as the one on top of his head, will ignite methane, as methane is a remarkably flammable gas. And if enough should accumulate, methane becomes highly explosive. So how best do you think they would have protected themselves? I would imagine that many of you have heard of the canaries in the mines.
Yeah.
While this was true, here in the number 9, the nature of our operation really didn't permit the usage of canaries. It was just too loud. Save for the fact that by then, 1855, an invention that replaced the canaries was already in widespread use throughout the mines. A lantern developed by an English scientist by the name of Sir Humphrey Davy called the Davy lamp. What the Davy lamp was a small cylindrical lantern that housed a small flame inside of fine steel screens. The purpose of which is it allows air and gas to enter that lantern and affect the flame in such a way the miner can accurately tell exactly what kind of gas is present and how much. The two things the canary is incapable of doing. Up until very recently, we operated by almost that exact same piece of equipment. Except today, it would have taken the form of the modern flame safety lamp. This is not much of an evolution on Sir Humphrey Davy's original design, just using modern principles of design, sciences, and materials. How it works is, let's say the air here may have been allowed to become stagnant, black damp may have settled, if they should happen to do so at all. One way to tell accurately exactly what kind of gas is present. Now on to the big one, methane, fire damp. Understand what occurs naturally in the geological processes of the rock and coal around us. One of the reasons as to why we have so much natural gas here in Pennsylvania. What happens is we unearth that fire damp as they blast and remove the rock and coal from the mountains. So let's say they may have done just that with this little nook here. How they're going to check for fire damp is they're going to hold their lantern to the place they just emptied, thinking fire damp may have come out of it, and they're going to take their safety lamp and they're going to raise it towards the ceiling, as high and as close as they can get it, and observe whether or not the flame increases in size, or in the case of methane, should change to a deep blue. They only stopped making these in around the turn of the millennium in the 2000s. And many miners today would still prefer to carry this, over 200-year-old tried and tested designs of the mines, than the beeping little digital readers they have to carry in today. The next stop on our tour is going to be one of the places that the miner may have spent his average day, the miner's chamber. To get there, we're going to make our way through this former section of the diamond vein. Before we do so, however, if you're about as tall or taller than me, I would highly advise that you watch your head, as this is the second lowest point on the tour. In addition, on the other side, the rails of the floor are a bit more exposed and can be very easy to slip on, so do please keep that in mind. You'll have plenty of room to branch out on the left, a little bit on the right. And you'll follow me.
I'm just looking down the mule one.
Yeah, you can see where it drops down, then he goes like at a 45-degree angle down with steps. Oh, I wanted to see this guy here.
Oh, watch out for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's tall. That one.
Where you at? There you go. There he is.
I just wanted to get him. Oh, right in the face.
Yep, he's smiling at you.
Now here we arrive at the miner's chamber. This is where the rock and coal is going to be coming off of the mountain on the more individual scale. As the day starts here, with the miner and his laborer working with him, mustering all the tools and equipment they need for their day, staging it here so that it is ready for them to go. Once that's done, the miner's going to make his way up into the chamber. Now to get from here to there, there's normally going to be a ladder right here that the miner would have built himself. He's going to build that ladder himself, because if a tool or piece of equipment was not mandated to be provided to him by either the state or federal government, or was not absolutely necessary to the accomplishment of his work, such as, say, the safety lamp, the headlamp, or the helmet, the mines had zero inclination or obligation to provide him with that equipment. But they were more than happy to make him pay them for it. We'll get to that at the next stop. The miner's going to make his way up into the chamber. He's going to be checking for black damp as he makes his way up to the highest point in the coal seam he can get to relative to his position. He is then going to set about his work, actually drilling into the mountain face and then packing the holes he drills with explosives. He's going to wire and rig those charges and then make his way back down here. Once down here, him and the laborer working with him are going to shout fire or fire in the hole, some variation of a warning. Enough so to notify the miners and laborers around them that a detonation is about to occur. Once that's done, they're going to step down, they're going to get to cover, and they're going to set off their charges. Once the dust settles, the miner's going to make his way back up into the chamber. He's going to start to send the 1 to 2 tons of rock and coal he had just blasted out of the mountain down this chute here, which would have been adjacent to his position. The whole time he's going to be checking for fire damp as well. The material is going to make its way down and eventually accumulate in this end here that we refer to as the battery. Here, the laborer working with the miner is going to be sitting either on or next to a piece of wood that we refer to as a checkboard. You may be able to see this one here. I've seen historical footage of larger chambers and chutes and checkboards, but with that, he's going to regulate the flow of material coming out of the chute into the coal car that will be waiting where you're standing. Once the battery, the chute, and the chamber had all been emptied and cleared, the miner is going to make his way back down here once again. He's going to collect some of the timbers he brought with him and proceed back up into the chamber. He's going to square off and secure his new working area, while also extending the chute to his new position as well. And he is then going to get ready to do all of that work, up to 2 to 3 more times for the duration of his 10-hour shift, which is going to happen 6 days a week. 7 should the company have said so. Here in the number 9, we were a rather mid-sized operation relative to the era. We operated 2 10-hour shifts of roughly 200 to 250 men per shift. Now, a note on this chamber is we consider this to be a completed example of a miner's chamber. It extends up into the mountain for about 100 feet at a roughly 45-degree angle. When these chambers were built, they could take any number of different shapes, so long as they are being built in an upwards direction. Because that's the way the miner wants the chute to be going. Because the best tool he has, that doesn't cost him anything, is gravity. Gravity takes all that material out of the chamber down the chute into the car. Remember back to the passing branch. Gravity makes it easier for the car to roll out of the mountain, going down this roughly 1% grade. Takes the water out down the same grade as well. Feeds the rock and coal through the breakers, and gravity even powered the railroads prior to the invention of the steam-driven locomotive. The gravity slope railroads of the Delaware Hudson Company, formerly located in the Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, Wyoming Valley area. When the chambers were built, they would have been spaced every 60 or so feet apart from each other to ensure safe creation of the chamber itself and a supplemental airway. With that number in mind, we estimate there are thousands of these all throughout the 20 to 24 miles of tunnels that are around us and below us. This is where I will be stepping down now, and you'll all have the opportunity to come up here and get a good look at the miner's chamber.
We're stuck.
Okay.
It seems to me that they would have.
Go to the right.
Yep.
Yeah, have it here above us. That's just.
It's all right.
Let's go over here and get behind these.
There you go. Good job. It's pretty cool. There you go. You okay? Hey, buddy. Here.
Now, given the context of the information I've provided thus far, I would assume that many of you wouldn't think healthcare mattered much down here in the mine. For a time, it did not even exist. Prior to the 1890s, let's say we have a miner back in the chamber we just came from. He has fallen down that chamber and gotten hurt in such a way that he has been immobilized. What is going to happen is the laborer working with that miner is going to get him to the base of the chamber, or the safest place he could stow him. He may try to help his injuries, but wherever the laborer puts the miner when he gets hurt is where he will be staying until the end of the shift. So if he got hurt in hour 1 of 10, not only do I hope he's hurt in one piece, I hope he can get comfortable. As a result of working conditions like that, in the 1890s and the turn of the century in the 1900s, most famously 1902, we experienced major strikes and walk-offs in our region, done largely at the behest of the UMWA, the United Mine Workers of America, one of the first major labor unions in our nation's history, and their leader, John Mitchell. For more in-depth on that, I will turn you towards the movie that plays in our museum, because believe me, it is an entire tour's worth of information. It's about 55 minutes, roughly, if you want to sit in on it, but just keep that in mind. Through these strikes and walk-offs, the UMWA lobbies largely for three main things. The first of which would have been a standardized working day, because who wants to work 10 hours down here? The second would have been a standardized form of pay. As understand in many cases, the miners were not even paid in actual tangible U.S. currency. Now, I'm sure some of you have heard of the company script. What that was money that the miners could only spend in the stores owned and operated by the coal company that they worked for. However, here in the Anthracite region, the mines largely worked based upon a credit system. That is one of the reasons why we saw such a prevalence of kids working in the mines, is the families needed every cent and resource they could coming into the home. Because let's say our example miner back at the chamber who got hurt didn't make it. What's going to happen is they are going to leave his body in the mine until the end of the shift. Remember what I mentioned back at the shaft about the repair shop? The same applies here. Why load up a car full of wounded men and bodies when that car can instead be rolling out of here with 5 tons of anthracite? When the time does come for him to be removed, it is done so. And his remains are returned to his family, often how they found him. So I hope he went out in one piece. Often they would have just brought him back into the home or onto the property and just left him there. I had a guest on one of my tours tell me as such. An older woman explained to me how her grandfather actually passed away in a mine like this. When the time came for his remains to be removed, they brought him back to the home, brought him inside, and just left him on the dining room table. Now, if that family is living in company-provided housing, and the only person working for the mines was now deceased, that family typically had either 24 hours to replace him as a laborer in the mine, or they will be evicted from the home. Because the coal company owned that home. They owned the stores that sold the miner all the tools he needed to use to work down here in the mines that they paid him to work in. And they sold the stores that sold the family everything they needed to keep themselves alive. In the worst cases, working for the mines becomes another form of indentured servitude, basically paid slavery. Nowhere more so difficult was it for the immigrant miners, primarily coming over from Europe at the time. The Dutch, the Welsh, the Germans, the Polish, the Czechs, the Slovaks, the Italians, the Lithuanians, and especially the Irish. As a result of those substandard working conditions, the union lobbied for improvements to said conditions through the strikes and walkouts. Again, that's the third thing they lobbied for. As a result of those conditions, amongst the things we start to see happen in the mines is the actual implementation of medical facilities inside of the mines. Now, your typical mine, hospital, trauma center, triage, whatever you want to refer to it as, would have looked nothing like this. It would have instead been a simple stone or wooden shack built upon a well-traveled walkway where they would take the wounded when they get hurt. They're still going to stay there, but now they maybe have some actual bandages and gauze to help take care of an injury. Oftentimes, nothing greater than the medical supplies you may find back in your own homes. And you can imagine how grievous the injuries would have gotten down here. In the 1930s, we saw the installation of our own, the Dr. Young Memorial Hospital, named in honor of Dr. J.H. Young, the LCNN's company surgeon. Named so in honor because Dr. Young took it upon himself to personally train the first on-hand medical staff that would have been permanently stationed in this building here. Now, these aren't actual real nurses or doctors per se, but these are people trained enough now in medical care that when a miner is hurt, he is brought here. They have the knowledge, the supplies, and the equipment to stabilize his injuries enough to get him out of the mine and to a proper medical facility. Here, that would have been the hospital located in Coaldale once that became established. Many lives were saved as a result of this building here. As understand, when this hospital was in operation, it would have been kept clean, it would have been kept as sterile as possible, it would have been maintained to be well-staffed and well-supplied. This hospital won awards for the quality of its care, its staff, and its facilities. But understand that many lives were also lost here in the 9. It's only inevitable. As of recording by the company, we have 67 confirmed fatalities down here in the 9. Men and children of all ages lost their lives working in these very tunnels we have been walking through. The youngest I'm aware of to die down here was a boy by the age of 15. He was run over by a coal cart. The last to die down here was in 1959. Now let's go back to our example miner in the chamber one more time. He has been hurt and he has been left there. Let's say where I was standing. He has been left in the cold, in the damp, in the wet, in the mud, in the muck. But most importantly to him, the wounded miner, he has been left in the dark. Are you all willing to see how dark? What you should see where you're standing is the portal and sunlight coming in through from the day. And what you see is this blocking your view is what we know as a gratis. What that is basically is a tarp material that they would establish to create a kind of barrier or wall that helps them regulate the flow of air to use in conjunction with their other devices to get the air and gas and dust to the mine's airways. One of which can be seen when we start to make our way through this passage here. This passage, as I mentioned, is formerly a section of the Primrose made of coal. This was mined very early on in our operations here. Number 9, roughly around 1858, only 3 years after the opening of these tunnels, and only a few prior to the beginning of our American Civil War. Now, as we make our way on through here, I do ask that you please keep in mind that low I-beam, as that is the lowest point on the tour, and I can hit this with my helmet on. But if you'll follow me, there's 2 things I want to show you. Now, just like the diamond vein we walked through earlier, the entire width of this tunnel was once formerly solid anthracite coal. Looking to the ceiling, you can see some of that coal still left. This shiny black rock you see reflecting my headlamp is what ultimately paid for the whole party. And it's a good demonstration of the nature of the coal vein too, averaging roughly 9.5 to 10 feet wide. As you can see, the coal extends all the way to the opposite side of the chamber. Now you may ask why that coal is still there. They cannot mine every last ounce of it, because they do that, the mountain is coming down. They still need to mine that coal a little more accessibly to create the area that I mentioned.
What's that?
Can you see this over here? This airway extends for about 60 feet straight up into the mountain and averages roughly 24 inches square wide. The purpose of this is it eventually reaches another tunnel, just like we're standing in, far smaller, known as a cross-cut tunnel, or what the miners used to call a monkey tunnel. The purpose of which is to create a latticework of intricately laced chambers, tunnels, passageways, walkways, to allow a kind of vent system to form that allows air to be circulated all throughout our mine. Now I encourage you to take your time in getting a good look at the airway there. There's actually a second older style miner's chamber just above the doorway here. But while you do that, I'll get out of your way and I'll wait just over at the Go Devil for you.
Oh, yeah,
Did you get a good shot of the vein?
Yep.
I'll have to watch a video.
Now that we've returned to the Go Devil, I'd like to briefly discuss anthracite mining in the modern day. Today we do not mine anthracite coal like this any longer. It is not safe, it is not affordable, and it is nowhere near as efficient in production as they need it to be in today's industrial world. Today we operate what we know as open pit strip mining. Massive surface operations that scour the surface of the earth to pull every ounce of material they can out of the ground. Essentially digging a really big hole. The key difference between here and there is that a mine like this, we go into the mountain. With a strip mine, they erase that mountain. Today, we no longer use anthracite coal primarily for its exothermic uses, while we do still burn it here in Pennsylvania to provide us energy through power plants and in industrial furnaces and in in-home heating. We use anthracite today primarily for its unique chemical content. Understand that anthracite coal is unique in that it is the last stage in the life cycle of coal before it actually becomes graphite. As such, anthracite is unique in that it is almost chemically pure carbon. We use that carbon content to produce over 60 products critical to our function as a modern-day society. Known foremost are carbon steels, carbon filters, and carbon fibers. Let that underpin the importance of this industry in the modern day, as anywhere that needs anthracite coal will more than likely get it from here, as these fiber-soaked counties in northeastern Pennsylvania are home to almost the single largest deposit of anthracite coal on this planet. We send our coal domestically, but we also send it all over the world. The other most important facet of the history of the anthracite industry, aside from its own and what it has done for labor, is what it has done for our local communities. Millions of people came here from across the world, primarily Europe, as I mentioned, and what was the United States at the time, based upon that promise of a better tomorrow. Now, what they found here arguably was far from that. But as a result of that intermingling of peoples, countless languages, religions, ethnicities, cultures, and heritages all came together here to give rise to the communities we know today as Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Hazleton, Tamaqua, McAdoo, Lansford, Coaldale, Pittston, Jenkins Township, Kingston, Back Mountain, Warrior Run, Nescahoning, Nanticoke, Mock-Chunk, now known as Jim Thorpe, Shenandoah, Monroe City, Ashland, Freeland, Pottsville, all of Schuylkill County, all of Luzerne County, all of Carbon County exist because of this industry. Because historically, there's not much else here. We have just traveled for about 250 years of history in a little under than an hour. I hope I've been informative, if not enthralling in my presentation of that history. I thank you all for coming to the number 9 today and experiencing today's history, which I encourage you all to return in your own time and experience once again. As understand, we do not have a script here in the number 9. Just the available facts and history and how we choose to present them. As such, every tour differs, either slightly or greatly, and many of our other guides have actual life experience in the anthracite industry and provide that knowledge and facts I couldn't hope to come close to yet. If you have not had the opportunity to peruse our museum, I encourage you to do so. I thank you for coming on my tour today, and on behalf of the number 9, I hope we hope you have enjoyed your experience with us here today, and we do hope you will give us the opportunity to educate and entertain you all again at some point in the future. Thank you. The train actually just came back in the tunnel, I hear.
There's Zay. Right in here, buddy.
You never know.
Like some of their marriages.
Best we can do.
See, there's somebody that goes on tour. My hero right there.
Oh yeah.
Did you get video?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Lots of good stuff.
Alrighty, I guess we can walk on out.
This is kind of our last thing. Wow.
Okay.
The train ride. Yeah, that was nice. We did that this morning.
It's just perfect for you, huh? Yeah, you don't have to touch. We would have known it if you did.
Back in my stomach, this is hurting.
There's no wind, there's no wind, there's nothing. The air is kind of stale.